her family growing up in Washington Depot, and later on. Her name, of course, is Mildred Roseen, and I'm Hartwell Green Thompson Jr., obviously, and this is 3 February 1991. And Mildred, tell me how it was. Do you remember some of your early recollections of being a kid? By the time you came along, the family was all in Washington, or Washington Depot, right?
Yes, I was born in the same, I lived in the same house all my life in Washington. And my sister Eleanor and I were the only ones born in that house. And it was, we had, my father had a cow and a calf and a pig and chickens. So we were pretty well self-sufficient. And Mother used to can things, so we seldom had to buy except the staples. And she baked her own bread. And we had fruit trees, so we were well supplied. We had a happy childhood. It was a nice little village. And our life really, our affairs outside of the home centered around the church and its affairs. We were invited to, sometimes invited to other churches for the Christmas party.
Mm-hmm.
But
what church was it? Was it
the Swedish Congregational?
Which is, I remember Mother talking, your sister Sigrid Johnson. It was a fairly conservative church.
Yes, and it was the there was another Swedish church, but Washington was thickly settled with Swedish people. So they didn't have much for amusement, but they were very happy. And the women, it was a wealthy, Washington, Connecticut, the Green as we call it, was a wealthy community. There were millionaires there.
Even in your day?
Yes. And I saw my first pierce arrow when I was there. It belonged to Mr. Veningen.
Veningen or Venigen?
Veningen.
And the pierce arrow, as I recall, because I do recall them, was an expensive,
yes,
big car.
Yes, it was. But he had many of the Swedish men used to be caretakers or coachmen, because they had horses too, you know. And so they had residents right on their property and were taken care of vegetables and provision for heat. Many of them did, and I often wish that my father had done that.
He would have been ideal for that.
He would. He was very self-conscious about doing things right. But this Mr. Veningen always, because of the association with the man who was the coachman, he always supplied our, at Christmas time, with these delicious candies. We just all looked forward to and of course, different times during the year too. They also brought other things into the town, like it was a Negro men's choir, or chorus, who would come every summer. The Hampton Institute, I think it was, and they had them come up every summer. So we were very fortunate to be, because of the connections with these families.
Right. What were your, describe your, this is a hard question, describe your father and mother in just a paragraph or two. What was your dad, Grandpa Johnson, like?
He was I don't think you could find a more honest man who walked the ends of the earth. He just wasn't forward in any ways. He just wanted to do things right and not cause any trouble. But Mother was, she was more aggressive, so it was a good combination.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very hard-working people.
Mm-hmm.
Dad was a stonemason, so he would do a day's work on his garden and taking care of the cow and the calf. Mother took care of the chickens. But he would do a day's work before he had to walk to wherever his work was. Perhaps it might have been a couple miles. You know where the green is?
Yes.
That's at least maybe 2 miles.
Yeah.
And without any complaint. And I think that was one of the reasons why he moved to Bristol, because there was no work in the winter. He just felt as though he wasn't producing, I guess.
Mm.
And Mother was very ambitious too, and she tried to give us the advantages of as much as she could afford. They could afford. Gave us piano lessons. And,
Really?
yes. And your mother and Eleanor and I, but all three had a teacher come to the house.
I didn't know that.
Yes. So we had a piano when we lived there.
Did Leroy, your brother,
and
take?
Leroy played the mandolin.
Mm-hmm. Leroy,
yes. So they tried to, and they always were thinking of our benefit, things for our benefit. So we had a happy childhood. And
your mother, you mentioned some things about her. You said she was a little more aggressive than your father was. Grandma Johnson, I remember used to, she came across when I knew her as somewhat of a scold, or, you know, she was always prodding your Grandpa Johnson to do things, but, you know, she had a side which you saw a lot more of than I did, and of course I loved them both, but what, so if you were to describe them, or your mom rather, how would you, in a few words, characterize her? Was she affectionate or loving, or did she tend to be not demonstrative?
With the children, she was toward him too, but he was hesitant about things, you know, and she was more aggressive, as I said, a little aggressive, not uncomfortably so, but he took a little longer to get doing with things, but he'd have his men in, I remember sitting around the stove upstairs, have cider, hot cider, so he'd have connections that's about all I know with men, except through the church.
Mm-hmm.
When they both go. But he was very ambitious and wanted to provide for us. Never did anything out of the way. I've never spanked by him at all my life. Well, I didn't get too many from my mother either, except once I ran away when I was about 3. Not far, but just up the road, and I guess they wanted to teach me that wasn't the place for me to be.
Yeah.
No, they were both very kind to us, and Mother used to do take in laundry for many of these wealthy people. In fact, when they'd go back to New York, they would send up we had railroads running then. They'd send up their truckloads of clothes, and they loved to have them out in the fresh air.
Mm-hmm.
So she'd launder them and then iron them and send them back.
So they both had very busy days.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
they did. They were very busy. And well, their social life was, her mother's, the ladies, was their ladies' aid. They'd get together.
Was that church related?
Yes, and do things for the, I suppose I imagine they sent them to missionaries, making blankets and quilting. I remember seeing the frames up for tacking quilts. You know, that she had her own.
Now, when you spoke about being there with chickens and cows and all that, did you have a cow as long as you remember Washington?
Yes, the same cow.
Oh, really?
Yes, and we even brought her to Bristol on the train. Did you know that?
I guess, now that you say so.
We had a Jersey cow with delicious, delicious cream and milk. Her dad rented a railroad car and put the cow and her calf and some chickens on the train, on one end of the train, and our furniture was on the other end of the railroad car.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we got to Bristol.
And how old were you when you came to Bristol?
I was 12.
And Mother was about 17. She had started Hartford Hospital Training
Yes.
School.
Well, I would have been 12. We moved in May, and I would have been 12 in June.
Yeah.
And then she was 6 years older than I.
What do you remember about my mother, Sigrid?
Well, she was always very prim and proper and very dependable. We had our own chores to do in the house. Like hers was to wash, we had kerosene lamps. So her chore was to keep the shades washed, or the glass shades washed and in order. And Eleanor and she used to make the beds. I washed the dishes. So we all had our chores. I set the table too.
What did Leroy do?
Well, he had to get the water. We had a spring. We didn't have drinking water in the house or near the house, so he had to go and get the water for the spring. And he churned the butter, the cream into butter. And many times the churn would stop, be silent, so we'd have to jog him out because he was so interested in the book he was reading that he stopped churning. I still have that churn.
You do?
Yes. We made it into an umbrella stand, but I still have all the parts. It's one of those that stand on the floor and then the one that goes up and down, because there were others that do crank, but this was the kind that you push
So there was
down.
You were, Sigrid, my mother was first, and then
Leroy.
The second was Leroy, who was a couple of years younger than Mother.
4 years older than I guess.
And then Aunt Eleanor, who became a Molander later on, she was the third.
Yes, she was a year and a half older than I.
And she went to Hartford Hospital to nurses training also.
Yeah, but before that, after high school, she worked in a business office, the Horton Fish, where they made fish poles.
Where?
In Bristol.
In Bristol?
And she and a companion, a fellow worker, in the office, I guess they got tired of doing the same thing all the time, so they made up their minds. They both went trading. And she went to the Hartford Hospital, and her girlfriend went to the St. Francis.
But you decided to be a teacher and went to what was called then the New Britain Normal School?
That's right.
Now it's called Central Connecticut University.
Right. I was the last class to graduate from that old normal school on High Street.
And did you always teach school in Bristol?
Yes. I taught for 5 years. In those days, when you were married, you had to leave. You could finish out your year, and you had to leave. They didn't want married women. And then I had my children, and I was substituting, but I went back when Peter was a junior in high school. I taught 29 years altogether.
29. And how old were you when you retired from teaching?
64.
64, right. And all of you married, all the
Yes.
the Grandpa and Grandma Johnson's children. What did you all make of my father when he showed up for he must have met you all before he married my mother.
He was very, very, very kind to us, and
he certainly
put it in. He didn't have any flares about just because he was
flares or airs.
Airs, I'd say, out of our group, social group, really. But he was just as down to earth as any of us.
Yeah.
Yes, we accepted him
immediately. He was a New England wasp. His people came over from across the sea sooner than you all did, but also of humble origins.
Yes. See, Dad emigrated around 1894, and I looked up, he became a citizen in 98. Well, that was the year your mother was born. And Mother came about the same time, and I don't know if you knew that, but they were born on exactly the same day and just as old, June 23rd, 1872. And then they...
and were they from the same area, same village?
From the same, around the same area, and they said they may have been in the same church many times, but they didn't know each other until they came to Washington.
What irony, what a striking...
Yes, yes. I forgot to say that in Washington, the families, you know, we weren't isolated in any way. We knew practically everybody in the town because it was so small. But they'd go, invite, each family would go and visit another family on a Sunday. And of course, they'd have to come and get us when we, with their horse and wagon. And we remember those instances.
Yeah. You didn't have a horse and buggy?
No, Dad had he had a horse. They lived in Bethlehem a very short time, but he was so ambitious and had horses and I guess cows too. But he was a type that he just had to work. He'd work himself into a nervous breakdown. So Mother, I guess they decided that they had to leave the farm. But I remember.
Was the farm in Bethlehem or Morris?
In Bethlehem.
Uh-huh. But my mother was born in, is it Morris or Warren?
Warren.
Warren?
Yeah.
What were they doing up there?
Well, Dad was working near Lake Warmwalk for a man named Mr. Goodhill, who had a farm.
Mm-hmm.
I guess he had cows, and I don't know, I guess he was just a handyman. The times were hard when he came over there. It was
Your father?
During Cleveland's administration, and times it was hard to get a job.
Mm-hmm.
So he was worked there, and then they moved to Washington. Leroy was born in Washington too, but not in the house where we lived.
So they came to Washington first, and then went to Bethlehem after they were married.
Well, they were working in both of them were working in Washington,
Mm-hmm.
and Mother was a cook with a doctor,
Mm-hmm.
and they were married in that church. I think they must have gone right to. I can't remember if they, or was never told whether they went directly to Bethlehem after they were married, because you see, your mother was born in Warren, and he was working for Mr. Goodhue, so I think it was immediately after they were married that they went to Preston.
And anyway, there was that time when they were farming for a little while, and then they moved back to Washington, and he was a stonemason and did various things.
That was his work in Sweden.
Yeah.
His stonemason.
Yeah. And when my mother married my father and was over here in the Hartford area, and you all were in even Bristol by that time, what you'd see each other. She drove over pretty often.
Yes, and I think perhaps that may have been another reason why he came to Bristol.
Your father?
Because of the train connections. You perhaps spend almost a whole day just getting from Washington to, you have to be waiting in Hollyville, I think that was the name of the town, where there was a train connections. And that may have been one of the reasons why he also came.
So it wouldn't be so far for my mother to commute on her days off or weekends off?
Yes, it'd be only about an hour to Hartford. So by train then, and then later when Eleanor went, I had my car, so I used to do the same, bring her home. But I think that was perhaps a big factor too.
And Mother went right from nurses training to being a staff nurse, and then they married, and then she stopped working, and eventually I was born. What about the next one, Leroy?
Yes.
After he left Washington, what did he do?
He graduated from the Washington High School in that year that we moved. No, let me see. No, I guess he was 16, 1916. So he took a postgraduate course at the Bristol High School, and in the meantime he was working at the Connecticut Light and Power too in the office, preparing. He had made up his mind he wanted to go to college, so he went to I guess he worked. He went to school one year working too, and then I think he worked one whole year, and then he went down to Columbia. And
Did
after that,
he graduated from Columbia
yes.
College, Columbia University?
Yes.
And then
He was going evenings to Columbia. He was going to be he thought he was going to be a lawyer. He really didn't know, either that or a journalist. But he really didn't finish his lawyer's course.
But he did finish his BA or bachelor's degree.
In Columbia,
yeah.
Yes. But then this was actually, he went almost 3 years
Really?
to law school.
Okay, I didn't know that. And did he always work in the New York area?
Yes, he worked in a bank, what was the name of the bank where he worked? Seems to me it was the Chase
Well, that could be.
National Bank at one
Yeah.
time. And
When I first became aware of him, he worked for the telephone company.
Western Electric.
Oh, is that right? Western Electric?
That's where he went after he decided he wasn't going to continue with being a
Law
lawyer.
school.
In that school.
And he married, and he had one child, and they eventually split up, or did he and Ruth divorce, or did they?
No, he died while they were still together, but things weren't running smoothly. But he died when he was up visiting up in Farmington.
I remember.
He had a heart attack, and his widow was still living down in New York. And eventually, a few years later, she died.
Tell me about Aunt Eleanor. You remember her quite well, I'm
Yes,
sure.
we were
Close.
more of an age year and a half.
And she graduated from high school in Bristol.
Yes.
And then
she started in
Washington.
Washington,
But finished up in Bristol. And
16 years old when she graduated.
Really? So she must have been a good student. And you said before she worked for a company that made fishing rods, and then got sick of the assembly line aspects, I guess you said.
The office.
Yeah. Oh,
She was in the
okay.
office.
And went into
That
nurses.
was after her high school.
Right.
She prepared for business,
Mm-hmm.
took the business course, but they decided they was getting.
So she
Awesome.
went into nurses training at Hartford
Yes.
a few years after my mother went there.
And I think she graduated in 1919.
Right. My mother graduated in 1916, I think.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
No, couldn't
17? Well, close to those
Yes.
times. Because
Yeah.
my father arrived there in 1917 at Hartford Hospital as an intern, fresh out of Harvard Medical School, and they knew each other but didn't pay much attention to each other until after he came back from World War I.
So I think that she graduated in 1919, and I don't remember what year Eleanor graduated now.
No, I think Mother, are you sure Mother, maybe so, she entered,
Or very near the same time, because Eleanor, you see, was graduating when she was 16. So she could have been very, very near the year's difference, maybe, because she worked a couple of years.
Yeah. And Eleanor married a Swedish man,
Yeah,
Frank Bolander,
he was born in Sweden.
who I remember very well. And they had to work hard a lot of the time I knew them, because he had like the new immigrant person, he had jobs at the lower level of the scale, and eventually after I don't know what all he did, but he did all sorts of things. He was always busy, and he even worked for the police department for a while, and then he worked for Superior Electric, and he was retired. When he retired, he was working as an executive at Superior Electric.
Yes, I think he worked at Horton's for a short time too, and then he went in the police, got in the police department, and then he worked for Superior the rest of his life, until he retired.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to remember him coming over, and he used to love to get in the sunshine. He was always brown, very tan.
Yes.
And once in a while he'd come over to see us at the shore in Madison, and we'd see them occasionally in Niantic, but Or what, was that what they were? Or they retired, when they left Bristol, they retired
Yes, I guess it was.
to
I guess it
Black
was
Point or...
Black Point, I think that was in Niantic.
Yeah.
It wasn't far from New London.
And they had two daughters.
Two daughters.
Gail and Carol.
And Douglas.
And Douglas, right.
Came along.
And they have increased and multiplied, as the Bible says, since then.
Yes, yes.
So and all of those, the grandchildren of Frank Molander and Eleanor Johnson Molander are all people I know.
Yes, yes, they were. See, we used to compare their children with the ages of the different ones in your family,
Mm-hmm.
and like Sarah, I think, was the same age. We had three grandchildren my mother had 3 grandchildren expecting the same year.
Mm-hmm.
It would be Sarah and David, and that was Nancy's son. And let me see, who was the other one? Sarah was on your side, and must have been Rhonda.
Maybe so.
All three in 1 year.
That would be about right. So, and you know, I see them at weddings and things like that. They're all nice folks. And then you married a man named Walfred Roseen.
Right.
Not Racine, but Roseen.
Roseen, that's the Swedish
Roseen,
pronunciation.
the accent on the second syllable.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when he was courting you.
Do you used to come over to your house?
Well, or either that or I'd be in Bristol with Grandma Johnson and Grandpa, and I was aware that you were going to get married.
Yeah, it was 27.
And then you went to Sweden for a honeymoon.
Right. We were married in October in 1927, but we didn't announce it until the following July when we went to Sweden. I was teaching at the time, and I wasn't doing anything illegal because I was allowed to finish my year.
Yes.
But we just didn't want to make anything of it until the next year.
Yeah.
And then we went in July.
Time out.
The tape had to be changed. We talked about the fact you married Walfred Roseen in 1927 and then went to Sweden the following summer.
I'm wrong. We were married in 28.
28?
We were courting from 27 to 28. And then went to Sweden in 29, so I made a mistake.
29, and then good time to go just before the big depression.
Came back, and in August it happened. That we crashed.
October.
29. October.
October.
29.
I think Black Friday or something like that.
Yeah.
But when you were in Sweden, you obviously personally liked what you saw and met a lot of people.
Yes, unfortunately I had gone, the church we went to had just Swedish, preached only Swedish, sang Swedish songs. So you sort of learn it without realizing what you have stored there.
Mm-hmm.
So when I went to Sweden, it was very easy for me to just continue and learn new expressions, and
mm-hmm.
I had no problem.
Mm-hmm. How long were you over there in your honeymoon?
I think it was from July, about 6 or 7 weeks.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, we went to Lisby. No tours or anything planned.